Very good, very good. We'll go ahead and get started here. Thanks everyone for joining us today for this webinar. Super excited. Before we get started, I did want to let you know that this webinar is going to be recorded, and tomorrow you'll receive the recording and the slides to the email that you provided at registration. So don't worry about taking too many notes. You can take notes if you want to, but you'll have this video and the slides afterwards. We're aware that a high number of Americans right now who are working remotely, and that a lot of the faculty need as much support as possible. So please feel free to let your colleagues know about these resources afterwards. Throughout the webinar, we encourage you to submit any questions and responses via the chat feature. So kind of down in the Zoom window, if you've never used Zoom before, there's the chat feature. Please just make sure to select everyone so that kind of all the attendees can see your questions and we can all kind of learn together. And so let's just do a quick test. If you're in the room ready to go, would you mind just dropping in the chat a quick hello, hi, how you doing? Hashtag work from home, hashtag personal space, personal distancing, social distancing, that's what it's called. Awesome. Michael, hello, Tony, Rebecca, Ian. Awesome, that's great. So that's working. We've got a lot to cover today, so we want to be respectful of your time. We know that time is of the essence and you got a lot going on. The world's a bit crazy right now. But first, wanted to let you know about who we are and what we'll cover today. So we are a higher education agency. We're committed to building awareness and growing enrollment for universities. That's kind of what Unincorporated does. We partner with deans, senior administration, and faculty to grow student interest, design branded content, and launch new programs and courses. That's what we're doing day in and day out with a lot of different schools that you see here. My name's Robert Johns. I'm the account supervisor at Unincorporated. I wanted to first introduce you to what we're going to be talking about, and then I'll introduce you to our main speakers. So some things we're going to be talking about today. We'll learn where and how to start teaching online. Then we'll discuss what we can do and make even at a distance. We're all kind of working from home right now. And finally, we'll review suggestions on digital technology for teaching and working. So this is geared towards people who work at universities, both from the faculty perspective and the administrator perspective. Let me go ahead and introduce our main speakers for today. Ian Evenstar is founder and CEO of Unincorporated. He spent nearly 20 years helping universities launch new programs and grow enrollments by implementing his extensive experience in design, strategy, and marketing. We also have Curtis Wang. He's a learning design consultant at Unincorporated and has spent nearly 10 years in various educational roles from practice to research to design. And at UN, he contributes insights to the intersections of these three different lenses. My name's Robert Johns. I'll be your host. I've spent over 10 years in the higher ed space in different strategic capacities, marketing and advertising. And now at Unincorporated, I work with our clients to create brand experiences that engage and delight students at all the different touch points. So as we jump in, thanks again for joining us. Ian and Curtis, I'll let you guys take it away.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Robert, and welcome to everybody. Again, really happy to be here. Truth be told, this is our first webinar. And it was, by virtue of course, working from home and a response that we had to a question I think that all of us have been asking, which is, how can we give back to society right now? How can we help? What can we do really to lend a helping hand? And I have a unique perspective. I'm a lecturer and an educator at Cal State LA, also CEO of a digital agency focused in higher ed. So it felt natural for us to develop a webinar and give our perspective on strategies, tips, and techniques on how to kind of manage through this time. Teaching and learning has to continue, but we also, for the administrators in the room, we also have to continue to lead our teams and lead our organizations. So we'll try to keep the content appropriate for everyone that's here. One of the, I think the questions that you might all be asking is why zombie? Well, the zombie curriculum, or this idea, was taken from a number of different sources. VCU released a rapid response plan. Brandon University, one of the oldest online accredited universities, has also their rapid response plan, and then the Center of Excellence in Teaching and Learning. Those are across the nation and in every university, and they of course have their own set of university-specific support documents. So we've been culminating this from these sources. And when I first heard of the COVID-19 case in California, which was around March 12th, I started actually pulling from these various places and started gathering resources for teaching and learning, the administrators, the senior staff that we're supporting as an agency, but also resources that I could use in my own classroom. So the Z.O.M.B.I.E acronym actually comes from the Virginia Commonwealth University and some of the messaging that they've put out there. So I want to give credit where credit is due. And also, though, as we started thinking about this, we started becoming interested in like the zombie story or the genre of zombie films and what really the zombie metaphor means. I mean, as you know, zombies they're quite one-dimensional, right? They're these characters that eat brains and that's all they care about. So they're pretty deeply uninteresting, but they're also very metaphoric for many of the things that we experience as a human race. They've been like a metaphor for trials and tests against humanity in different ways. There is, of course, the original Night of the Living Dead, where they were a metaphor for racial politics. They have represented people being oppressed, like in the Land of the Dead and what those zombies represented. There's the fear of contagions, Resident Evil, maybe that's the one closest to the pandemic we're going through, and even like consumer unconsciousness as represented in the Dawn of the Dead. But ultimately, zombie metaphor for us is really about our own human adaptability, our own human reaction to stress, and ultimately the beauty of human instinct to survive. And so it seems very appropriate in this circumstance we're in now that we are battling battling the zombie and really trying to find a way to survive in this new norm. Really the true enemy of the zombie is this word ennui. It's this feeling of listlessness and general dissatisfaction with the new norm, the lack of activity we see in our homes, the lack of excitement of being able to convene in a common workspace in a physical classroom. And our response to this, the zombie defense, if you will, in context of this webinar, is to take Zoom and other multimedia basics for instruction and education and use that as our defense against this new metaphorical zombie and this ennui that we're all feeling as we're working from home and teaching from home, and students and staff are also participating in these online environments. So for most of us, this is the second week of shifting our instruction and our services and our business operations into an online environment. We've been forced to do this all without any luxury of time or stability that we really felt in the world before. And of course, we're asking ourselves, okay, well, what does it mean to, what's our goal, our BHAG, our big, hairy, audacious goal for all of this? And it's really continuity, continuity of experience, continuity of community, continuity of teaching and learning, and business as usual. I had a one-on-one with a student the other day, and she said to me, it just feels like we're starting a brand new semester. And coming from a design and advertising background, I started thinking about this idea of newness. And often new is like this shiny badge that we see. It's enhanced, it's improved, it's different. But if this were really that zombie movie that I alluded to, new is now for us about adapting and surviving in almost overnight situations. So how are we adapting? This is a question that you might want to consider as we go through the rest of the webinar and we get pretty practical and granular on what we can do to battle the ennui and use these new tools. But how have you adapted, or how can you continue to adapt is something to consider. I wanted to turn the mic over to Curtis because he actually, our learning scientist in the room, he actually asked this question to faculty and educators at USC, you know, how they were feeling and how they have adapted.
Right. Thanks, Ian. So yes, that's right. I once gave this Zoom workshop at USC to some faculty and staff, and I opened this workshop with this survey here. I ran a poll everywhere, and I basically surveyed them on their immediate feelings about a potential transition to an online environment. Potential because the mandate hadn't kicked in yet at the time, but it was a hypothetical. And sure enough, just several days later, it became a reality. But the point of this opening slide was to show that it's really important to first be aware of what this transition means for your colleagues. So for some, shifting to an online environment is merely an inconvenience. It's definitely a logistical headache. There are a lot of files to upload, and you have to really reconceptualize how you're going to organize all your content. But for others, it's more than just an inconvenience. It actually amounts to coerced culture shock. And I think it's really important to validate that. And you can see the results here in this slide. And it really doesn't matter how the numbers are distributed, because we have a 12% response rate for the lowest category, which is I'm very lost and I hate technology, help. So that definitely should be a concern, and that definitely needs to be mediated in some way or another. And so your goal in the short term isn't necessarily to turn your faculty and staff to become masters of online teaching, because that's just not realistic given the time constraints. But your goal is to be sensitive to the specific and differentiated kinds of support that they need to become as effective as they can in the circumstances. So some might need more time to just practice using the technology. Some might need to get a feel for the mechanics. Some need confidence, which in the research is tied to practice. And some just need good myth busting.
Yeah, that's so true, Curtis. And I think, you know, one of the takeaways for me when looking at this data here is to emphasize the point that we are on the spectrum, and, you know, we're all kind of struggling with this transition and adapting at different speeds and different tempos, and, you know, through the lens of a student or, again, like a staff member or a teammate, they're also somewhere on this spectrum. And even this webinar, like when we were trying to put together the curriculum, this webinar, we didn't know like where people were on, you know, how they're feeling and where they are when it comes to like maybe digital comfort or, you know, technology as a means of expression. So we're certainly on this. And I think what a question that gets at the heart of this is maybe not so much of where you are and how you're feeling, where you fit on this, but this question here: what are you struggling with the most?
Yeah.
And
yeah, let's just pause here for a second, Ian, if you don't mind. And for those of you watching, if you could just answer this question kind of really briefly, and maybe drop it in the chat. What is it that you're struggling with most during this transition? I'll just share while you guys are doing that. For me, I've been working from home for about a week and a half now, and my struggle was finding a space that I could feel like was workspace. Sitting on the couch, sitting at the dining room table just wasn't working. And so even today, I was able to set up a table and like have my desk and have some of the tools that I'm used to having. So for those watching, you could just drop it in the chat. Maybe it's, you know, speed of the Wi-Fi, or maybe it's not having your office space like you're used to. Yeah, it looks like some people are saying managing their time in the midst of it all. Certainly feel that. Yeah, figuring out how to communicate information that is best done in person. Not having a dedicated workspace. Yeah, I feel that. Ooh, this is a good one. Maintaining enthusiasm and energy on Zoom, since it's hard to feed off others' energy when not in person.
Yeah, certainly. One of the pieces of feedback I received from a student, and this actually was echoed, a couple students shared this, you know, just simple things like getting out of bed and trying to, you know, to make their work a priority was difficult. You know, it's so much of it matters leaving our home to go and do work or to go and do our studies. Like that's a big part of our practice. And they asked me for advice in that moment, and I didn't have anything to offer them, but I think we're all kind of, dealing with the, the problem of the routine as well. Yeah, school tech failing. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we've talked about thanks for sharing, by the way. This is helpful for us because we want to continue doing this webinar series as we get more traction, maybe more attendees, a cohort, if you will, going through this work together, and we can continue to support each other. And, we've talked about like the concept of the Z.O.M.B.I.E curriculum or the Z.O.M.B.I.E webinar in many ways, and the origins of that and why it's important. But let's take a look at more of the conceptual side from an academic standpoint, and looking at the pedagogy and I guess the framework that we see when it comes to actual teaching and learning within a physical and digital space.
Okay, yeah, sure. I'll take this on, and I want to start by addressing a point of view. When we talk about point of view, I guess colloquially, we immediately think of individual points of view. So my experience as a student might not, well, it definitely won't be the same as the experience of an administrator or an instructor. But all of a sudden, we've been cast into kind of this common circumstance here. And so I want to dig a little bit deeper into the implications of what COVID-19 has forced us into. So for example, not talking about education for now, for better or for worse, over the past few weeks, we've seen a lot of cultural shifts as a result of mass social distancing. So for example, I feel like we've had this rekindled trust in science, scientific institutions, and health experts. Paralleling that is a broader interest in governance, and we're holding a lot of our leadership under scrutiny on a day-to-day basis. Another example would be empathy for workers who cannot distance themselves socially, including doctors and garbage collectors. And I guess speaking more for myself, we're getting better at cooking at home as well. Now, the example that I want to focus on here is this tension between the norms of traditional schooling and the norms of online media, as you see in this Venn diagram here. So for a long time, we've held on to this traditional model of schooling, which is hierarchical. So you have an instructor who is an authority figure who lays out explicit goals in a syllabus for all students to achieve, and they get evaluated for it. They get a letter grade or they get a number grade. And these are your conventional on-campus classes. But on the other hand, for as long as the internet has existed, online media is essentially a free-for-all arena with its own cultural norms. So namely, this is a space where all users set their own goals and achieve them at their own pace. It's not hierarchical. So these are your Reddits, your YouTubes, to an extent, even Mayo Clinic, if you've ever tried to self-diagnose a symptom that you've experienced. But in the present day, and just the past few weeks, we've all been forced into this one intersection where the philosophies of both are now in direct conflict with each other. So what does that mean for you working in an online school environment? Right off the bat, it's not just a matter of digitizing your course content. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that you should just accept that students in your Zoom session will just try to multitask and they're going to be distracted and there's nothing you can do about it. But the point is that this is where they're coming from. And so to adapt to it productively, it's not a matter of trying to fight it, but it's an adaptive measure that you have to think about. Or you got to hone strategies that can thrive in both of these spaces. And so there's a need to improvise in the short term, but translate that improvisation into a plan for the long term. Now, unfortunately, as we saw in one of the comments in the chat here, we just don't have the time to think about how we're going to go deep into the weeds and how do we optimize our teaching at this intersection of both domains. So again, naturally, there's got to be some improvisation and there's no way around it. So it's important to cut yourself some slack here. Your students are also going to be understanding of the situation, so they will also be forgiving. And as you improvise, you might discover strategies that could be adapted to the long term. And so I want to talk about the sweet spot here. So this is the gold standard for teaching and learning, whether or not you have a virus. So normally in instructional design, we give considerable attention to 3 domains: technology, instruction, and experience. So what the instruction domain refers to is the core endeavor of teaching and learning. So that includes teaching strategies, assessments, as well as the curricular content that students should be learning. The technology domain at the top refers to the infrastructure and whatever supporting materials or channels through which your instruction will be delivered. So sometimes it's operational, like Zoom or Google Suite, or sometimes it's directly relevant to the course content. For example, Harvard Business School or Pearson simulations that you might have to subscribe to. The experience domain refers to the more visceral relationship that students have or they perceive with any instance of learning. So for example, do they feel welcome in the learning environment? Do they feel like they matter to their peers or to the instructor, or even to the administrator if they ever show up in an office? And experience can also refer to the more concrete or tangible aspects that support the learning process. For example, having closed captioning in your videos, or the visual aesthetic or the design of the material so that they can be consumed more easily and enjoyably as well. But now it looks a bit more like this. So essentially technology, the technology bubble has kind of swallowed everything. And what this means in practice is that technology is no longer just a tool. It's the very context for pretty much everything. And so there's an upside and a downside to this. The downside, which I'm sure everyone's felt by now, is that regardless of your comfort level with technology, you realize you need to have a basic fluency for the technology and how it works. That's pretty much non-negotiable. And understandably, this will feel like a chore to some over others. The upside, however, is that once you've gotten over that initial barrier, it is sufficient to just focus all your attention from here on out on just the instruction and the experience. After you've gotten a basic feel for Zoom or Outlook Express or Slack or Google Suites here, you do not need specialized software after that. It is just a learning management system and Zoom, and that'll be sufficient to carry you on from here.
Yeah, that's really well put, and I love how you've reframed those 3 domains: technology, instruction, experience, into now this all-encompassing technology bubble that we're in. And you know, I'm again going kind of between 2 audiences here, or 2 worlds, but you know, instruction also is how we are leading, and you know, how we're actually managing others and mentoring others, right? So it's not just like the instruction in the classroom setting, but it's also how we're leading and how we're adapting the experience within this now technology bubble of our organizations, our companies, et cetera, our schools. So Curtis, you know, a question that came up for us is we're always thinking about, you know, well, what's the landscape of higher ed today, or what's the landscape of education? And I know that you put together a slide here to kind of talk about both the critique, but also maybe the opportunity that faces higher ed at this point.
Oh yeah, for sure. I think those who know me know that I have a lot of opinions about this, and I feel that this is a bit of a loaded slide, but long story short, I feel like, at least in the American education space, we've had this ideological appeal, so to speak, as to like, what is the role of higher education in our lives? And I mean that in the long term. So just to read off of this slide here, higher education is commonly seen as a vehicle for upward mobility in American society. Yet more recently, it also has been perceived as slow to evolve, innovate, and maintain relevance. So when you think about the trajectory of adopting new technologies, you almost never see schools being in that early adopter subcategory or subgroup. But I think once we get past this period of uncertainty and chaos, it would be a worthwhile question to answer. How might we turn this urgency into an opportunity? So how do we turn this situation from a need to adapt and react into a preemptive long-term strategy?
Yeah, yeah, certainly. And those who know me have heard me say, well, every challenge, every difficult circumstance is actually an opportunity. So I think thinking about that not only in our own micro world and our micro experience, but also at the macro level, how is this challenge an opportunity for the evolving landscape of higher ed? Can higher ed actually become stronger from all of this and actually become more relevant? But when thinking about ourselves, the big question, where do we start and how do we break this down into practical, realistic terms? And there are, I think, three key places where you need to really be realistic at this point. That's very Jocko-Willink of you. Yes, that's correct. I think there might have been some similarities there. But communication is absolutely most important at this. I mean, communication at large is probably one of the key drivers of community and relationships. But now more than ever, communication is really important. And not only that, but we need to also start by looking at how we can adapt our curriculum or our processes or our standard operating procedures into an online environment. And how can we create online content that is also compliant, ADA compliant for less than able-bodied individuals, and how do we create that online content so that it's not only ADA compliant but also mobile friendly across the board, assuming that most people are going to be communicating, interacting, teaching, and learning in a large part through their phones. So before we jump forward in some key takeaways in each of those categories, communication, adaptability, and migrating our content so that it's digital friendly and accessible, I think what we need to remember collectively is that the core to all of these experiences, whether it's in class, in work, in a university setting, really comes down to community. At least from my experience, the aspect of community has really been the core of meaningful work, meaningful schooling, and many social activities. Robert, weren't we just talking about this yesterday? You shared something about, like, you don't remember what you learned, but what was that exactly?
Oh, yeah. So I was just thinking back, it's been almost 10 years now, yikes, that since I graduated college. And I was just thinking, in the midst of all this, like, I don't really remember a whole lot about what I learned in Comms 101 or, some of those foundational courses, and even like kind of throughout college. I'm sure I'm putting it into practice and I've retained it somewhere back there, but I don't remember those things readily. But what I do remember and what I do see day in and day out is the relationships that I've built. I still keep in contact with many of my classmates and roommates from back in the day, and checking in on them, making sure they're okay. They're all over the US. I was talking to a friend just before this webinar in North Carolina. I have a good friend in Virginia. So
Right.
yeah, just the idea that, like, the coursework, while it's important, is not really what I remember so much as I do the relationships that I built in my time at school.
Yeah, well said. And if we can focus on the community aspect and the relationship aspect, even though we're in this little tech bubble now, we can still create tremendous value for everyone who we mentor, lead, coach, instruct, or work together. So here's one of 3 action items I'd like to leave for everyone. The first action item is, and you don't have to do this right now, but reflect on this. Like, how are some ways that you can enhance the sense of community within your organization, within your team, within your class, your online class? And, act on that. Really, really take this to heart. I have a student who, she said, she started a group chat with a few of her friends, and every day one of them takes on the responsibility to run or lead a yoga session, or run and lead a meditation, or if it's leg day, they'll do the leg workouts together. So they're building community through the sense of, yoga and meditation and working out together. Even in my jujitsu gym, we do a weekly workout together as well. And I have, lost some distance between these guys that I, typically roll with 2-3 times a week, but still have maintained that sense of community with them because of this. Even the faculty union that I'm in, they're doing the first ever virtual, first for them, probably been done before in other places, but their first ever happy hour, so we'll get on Zoom and, we'll celebrate and toast and cheers and, do some of that water cooler talk together as a union of faculty members. So think of ways you can enhance the community. That's the first action item. And when we get into communication, we're all feeling so inundated with the tools that are available and what to use. Should I be doing everything through my LMS, whether it's Canvas or Blackboard? Should I be holding true to my G Suite because that's maybe what my company or organization uses, or maybe it's Office 365 with those broken Microsoft Surfaces that Dr. Lance was talking about? Or, should I be using Slack, and is Slack even like FERPA, FERPA approved? Can I be giving feedback on coursework through Slack? I mean, these are some tough questions, and our best recommendation when it comes to communication is just establish some standard on communication and stick to what you are currently doing, because right now, as we're improvising, that's probably going to be the easiest and least stressful way to manage your communication. There are some few key points that we wanted to share with you around communication. Certainly, this is week 2. I'm sure everyone's contacted their students, but if you haven't, reach out to them again and just let them know you're thinking about them. You don't have to have like your entire plan, whether it's operational or curricular in place, but just hearing from you, I think, would be enough from a communication standpoint. I felt really good when my professor at jiu-jitsu just reached out and said, "Hey, wanted to check in, see how you're doing." Empathy is going to go a long way during this time, and being patient and flexible is going to also go a long way when it comes to communicating with each other. There are cases where, class and work even, and, as an employer, it's hard for me to remember this, but class and work is not a top priority. I mean, we've got families and friends, and we might even be personally affected by this. So just remembering that priorities have shifted, I think, is also key. And being at home also doesn't necessarily imply safe. I don't think I've heard in the media anyone talking about the fact that home may not be safe for all of us. We might be living in broken homes and stressful circumstances and exposed to things at home that are actually causing us more stress than just the annoyances of technology and slow Wi-Fi, et cetera. And, come at it with that space for grief, allowing space for grief and anxiety and mourning, and make sure to direct people, where they can go to help, I think is also a key facet of communication and your communication standards. So that's communication. When it comes to adapting the curriculum, I'm recommending for myself, and I've heard other university administrators recommend, that we modify assignments or maybe modify the projects that we're engaged in at work. So, if you're doing a film for a filmmaking class, maybe you scale it back and it's now a slideshow, or maybe it's a set of hand-drawn photo-based storyboards. And that, that's enough. And these group projects, which we love to emulate, maybe those become solo projects. And maybe there's a way for students to collaborate that doesn't actually require them to meet synchronously, and we'll get into asynchronous and synchronous here in a moment. But also remember, like, we have to complete work and do our assignments from what we have available in our home. So reframe projects from the perspective of what's available in a house. And if it's not possible to find a project that fits these needs of all of our students, what is possible? Plan for those alternative assignments. I heard this point number 5 here, a university administrator was saying, even if your students are getting any work done, that in itself could warrant a passing grade. You know, and I'm not sure what different high schools or universities have as far as their policy, but you know, even just showing up, being present, and completing things to the best of their ability could get them to that finish line of getting their degree or earning, you know, a badge to move forward with next year.
Yeah, just a quick
yeah,
note
and be
there.
flexible. Yep.
Just a quick note, I did read that Harvard and a lot of the top law schools have moved away from grades for the rest of the semester. And they're actually
Interesting.
doing the pass-fail for that exact reason.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for, yeah, and there we go. And Dr. Lance saying not allowed to grade anything. So I think that, yeah, to see people adapting their curriculum and the rubric that goes into grading curriculum is really great to see.
Yes.
So what can, you know, that's kind of where to start from our perspective. What can we do, or what can we even make from a distance? I think that there's two ways to think about events, learning events or social events. And it comes down to these two words that you're probably going to get tired of hearing, but synchronous and asynchronous. Curtis is, you know, working on a doctorate that examines this in depth, so I'm going to let him at least define these for us, and then I want to share some examples of synchronous and asynchronous things that we've been able to adapt.
Yeah, I think some of us might already know what synchronous versus asynchronous means, but I want to contextualize it by saying this first. I think traditionally when we're in a physical classroom setting, we probably tend to categorize activities of learning from the angle of what constitutes good teaching. And so, for example, like there are many ways to categorize learning. You could split it up into formative assessments versus evaluations, although I guess that's not really an option in high schools anymore, or even diagnostic assessments. You could categorize learning activities according to, for example, Bloom's taxonomy, where you measure higher order thinking skills versus lower order thinking skills. Or you could categorize learning activities according to the type of knowledge you're trying to assess, whether it's theoretical, hard knowledge, or factual knowledge versus, let's say, skills or more hands-on knowledge, or broader attitudes towards a situation. However, in the situation we're in right now, where there is so much attention that has to be given to the logistics and the mechanics, I do think it is appropriate to categorize it according to synchronous versus asynchronous, just because this physical context is kind of one of the limiting factors here. So just to recap what synchronous asynchronous means. Synchronous refers to just learning together in real time. And so I guess by definition, the very definition of synchronous learning is the pro. Everyone is together. Social distancing can be really isolating. So a Zoom session is probably your best bet at closing that physical as well as that emotional barrier, and seeing your peers can really help elevate the mood. The downside of synchronous activities are that not everyone has access to the technology they need to access for a synchronous class. So in some cases, it might raise some issues around access. For asynchronous modalities, asynchronous refers to not in real time. So that would be things like accessing materials in your learning management system or going on to YouTube to watch a video. It's not all happening at exactly the same time. Now, the upside to this is students can finish content at their own pace. Obviously, not all students are going to go through the same process, and that lessens the burden on scheduling as well. A downside to asynchronous learning is your students rarely, if ever, will see each other again for the semester. So there is a higher risk of social isolation, which kind of raises the question of how are you going to balance asynchronous activities with synchronous activities? In a way, their pros and cons kind of cancel each other out. But so given that, we do recommend that you use a hybrid approach to online instruction, as well as your workflow in the office. I know Ian has some really good examples of this hybrid approach that he uses both in the classroom and in the workplace. So Ian, would you like to talk about some of those examples that have worked for you?
Yeah, certainly. And I think that the notion of synchronous and asynchronous does very much so apply to living, working, as well as teaching and learning. And just to run through some of these examples through some screenshots, and unfortunately we don't have time to demo all of this, but again, if this cohort would like to come together and actually go through some demonstrations, maybe that could be a next step for us. But here's a weekly team meeting that we do at the office. It's called Wonderful Wednesday. It's through Zoom, and this is a synchronous example of us all getting together and just playing a game together. And you could see there were smiles and a sense of community across the board. There is also in class last night running a critique. I set up a couple breakout rooms through Zoom, and I allowed pairs of designers to meet virtually in a small group setting, and I could just kind of pop in and moderate and listen to their conversation and their critique, and they could share their work. And it was interesting because some of these students, I have a really hard time getting them just to engage at all and have a dialogue at all because they're shy. But with these breakout rooms, I noticed that they didn't even want to come back to the main room because they were having such a fulfilling, meaningful conversation. Another professor shared with me that she did a life drawing class where she set up the model in her house and the students all drew from that. And then, they had, again, a similar situation where they did a breakout room and they kind of critiqued each other's work. She said it was so successful that maybe she'll just use breakout rooms so they can draw together, so they can actually feel like there's someone by their side, as if they were sitting right next to them in the desk next door to the side of them as they're drawing together. This is how it looks in Zoom when you set up those breakout rooms. So from an educator standpoint, you can just kind of pop into these. Zoom makes it really easy to go in to breakout rooms and then back out. And, I was thinking about, and maybe this is for like my design team, maybe there's a breakout room just for the design team, and there's a breakout room for the marketing team, and they can have a sense of this kind of small group environment in a synchronous way. When it comes to asynchronous learning or experiences, do you manage the breakout attendees or do they choose? You can do it both ways. You can set it up manually, or you can just do it randomly. So either way, I actually like to do it both ways, just so they can get a feel. I call it like your critique partner, so they can pair up as you design or just randomly. A way to do asynchronous learning or asynchronous events, this is SoundCloud, and you can have a free account, upload a lecture or either of your own or of someone else, and you could either comment out at particular places. Here I'll point to, these markers here could either be your prompts for reflection or prompts for an essay, and you could make it a requirement for your students to actually comment at specific places or leave their comments throughout the lecture, and you could kind of get them engaged with your lecture at their own time. It doesn't have to be in a group setting. They could do this on their phone as they're sitting outside trying to get a break from everything else. So that's a great way to do asynchronous lectures through a sound format. You can also do this through video, right? So Vimeo and Frame.io are two great platforms where, again, you can upload either a webinar or a pre-recorded lecture or your own lecture, or even record your Zoom class lecture and then upload that later for comments and reflection. But I think that's also a really great way to use asynchronous learning and asynchronous events. And then lastly, when it comes to like or documents, this could either be a piece of art, or it could be literature or scripture or anything written. It's super simple, just to open the PDF, click this link, shareable link icon. It goes up to the cloud, and you can highlight text. Students staff, et cetera, can either comment, give revisions, feedback, or you can put some of your own prompts in there to, to encourage that deeper level of engagement. So those are, I think, some very tangible ways to enhance the experience through synchronous and asynchronous events. But let's not forget also that there's social events, right? And synchronous social events that are also, I think, that we have to design and encourage. So here's another action item: schedule an optional social gathering for your students or your staff or your colleagues, and encourage them to participate in that, or maybe even create their own. One social event that I've done, everyone opted in, and I said, hey, we're going to do a game. It's called Rose, Thorn, Bud. And since last time I saw you, since the last time we actually were in the same room together, tell me something good that's happened. Tell me something that's difficult, and tell me something that's hopeful. What's your rose, thorn, and bud? And that could be like a way to maybe just run or create kind of like a dinner party prompt almost to run a social event. This is 100% thank you. I'm just catching up on some of the
yeah, I was seeing a question
comments here
from Noel asking about sharing a document or list of discussion questions.
Mm-hmm.
I think the easiest way to probably do that would be to upload the PDF to, I don't know, Dropbox, Google Drive, whatever system you use, and then just drop that link into the chat, and everybody can click on the link and open up the file and reference it together. You could also email it as a PDF, but if you want to do it live, distribute it live, you can just drop that link right into the chat.
Yeah, I was trying to type up a response as well. In my experience, when the breakout group mode gets turned on, whatever content that the host was originally sharing actually disappears. So I think, as Robert suggested, you might have to have a separate process for that.
Yep, certainly. So I see that we're brushing up against our 60-minute mark, and some people, they have another meeting to attend to, and we'll try to finish in short form. But all of this, of course, will be recorded, right, Robert? And we'll send out the final transcript and the recording afterwards. So some final suggestions just around the notion of zombie and fighting that ennui that we're all experiencing. There was an exercise I saw in one of these webinars, and you could do it with me if you'd like, but she encouraged us to put our hands together like this. And then she said, okay, that feels normal. That feels right. Now take your hands apart and put them together intentionally where the other thumb is on top of the previous thumb. So basically reverse the position, and it feels awkward, right? It feels strange, and it's not life-threatening. And with good fortune behind our back here, we won't be in a circumstance where we are personally threatened from a health or safety standpoint. So what we're trying to manage is the awkwardness and getting used to that. So there is, I think, two places where you can help with dealing with or brushing through or smoothing the edges of that awkwardness. And it's around setting some new expectations if you haven't done so already. It sounds like many people have, and also getting clarity around some key processes. So Curtis, if you could, let's try to hit these two a little quickly so we can kind of finish out on time.
Yeah, sure. Managing expectations can be a bit of a tricky balancing act. I know I've alluded to this earlier, where be kind to yourself, be forgiving to yourself, do modify your expectations because we are in a bit of a trying time. But at the same time, at the end of the day, online or not, students are attending school to learn and to build themselves. And our faculty, administrators, and staff are in their service. And we're ultimately, in the service of kickstarting students' careers and their livelihoods. So given that, as flexible as we want to be, and as open to the ambiguity as we want to be, our motivations should still be more or less our motivations should still be the same for sure. And we should try to treat the online context as if it's simply an extension of the on-campus context. Just like we saw in the Venn diagram earlier on, sound instructional design and experience design is central to the learning experience. So the quality of the content should remain high, and we should still respect that learning is a communal and a social activity.
Beautiful. So if you've clarified those expectations for yourself, your staff, your students, your colleagues, the other thing to address, in my opinion, to make it feel less awkward during this time is around process. So, what's the plan for projects that are currently in process? Do those go on hold? Do they change? Are they going to be adapted? How will you do your online documentation moving forward? Is it everything going to be in a cloud now? It has to be mobile accessible. Those communication standards, we talked a lot about making sure that those are clear and that you have clarity around your communication processes, how you'll submit work, how you'll do reviews on that work, and then lastly, how you'll stay present and continue to run your office hours or your business hours. So the third and final action item, revise your syllabus. For the administrators, maybe it's not your syllabus, maybe it's your standard operating procedures, maybe it's even some of your job descriptions. Maybe rewrite your own job description and turn that into your boss perhaps. But revise those documents that are kind of guiding and directing learning and engagement through this time, and submit that back to your team. Submit that and place it into your LMS or share it through your Google Drive if that's how you're distributing your documents. Lastly, and these are some basic tips, just some real practical advice around Zoom. The important thing for Zoom is set some ground rules. Don't multitask. Everybody's mic should be turned off when they're not speaking. Start to really treat kind of those ground rules in class and in the office space. Think about how you adapt your ground rules to the Zoom space. Look into the camera, right? Even hide your panelist view or the photos of everyone in the room so you can look at the camera. Place the camera at eye level. Make sure you're not backlit. Have a comfortable headset so you can do an hour-long webinar and your ears don't start to hurt. But hide those participant pictures, like I said, so you can actually engage and keep good eye contact. Use the breakout room feature. I love the breakout room feature for all the reasons we talked about. Stay active in the chat. You got to kind of multitask, go back and forth. Raise your hand, lower your hand if the person's getting away with the material and you have a question. And then I think a key takeaway, a basic tip would just be to record your lectures, right? This kind of goes to marketing your courses. And for the use of like SEO on websites, or using these lectures later for curriculum or even social media campaigns, let's say, record some of your lectures, get those transcribed and repurpose those. Maybe they become a blog, maybe they become parts of a book you're working on, maybe they become a white paper or an essay perhaps, but certainly recording your lecture or your webinar and repurposing that material, I think, is a key use for Zoom. There are a few top secret ways to make yourself look better. Like you didn't just roll out of bed. This is me after a shower, but virtually rolling out of bed. And here I am looking at, people who are in my room, in my Zoom room, and I'm not engaged with the camera and I'm also backlit. So, hey, I just got to close the blinds, pick my head up and engage with the camera. I might go a step further and turn on, there's this great thing, it's like auto tuning. It's adjusting appearance, making your appearance look better. So you can turn on the adjust appearance setting in Zoom. And then lastly, go to a virtual background if you want, have some fun. If it's a day class and you're working during the day, have a daylight setting. Hey, maybe you're teaching an evening class, you're working at night, you want to set the mood and emulate what's happening outside. So the question is, would you rather talk to me, engage with me like before, when I didn't do any of these secret moves, or after? And I certainly would rather deal with the person on the right. This is cool too. I teach a business practices class for designers. So I've said, hey, you might be doing job interviews. Like, do these quick little easy things through Zoom. Make yourself look better and be more presentable. Be more professional in some ways by putting that best face forward in this case. These are the places where you adjust those settings, right? So it's under virtual background and touch up my appearance. And then, lastly, the thing that's kind of happening now just came out. It's called Zoom bombing. Curtis, why don't you share that with you?
Oh man. Okay. So basically, in a nutshell, Zoom bombers are this latest breed of internet trolls who are just going around random Zoom sessions and turning on their share screen function and sharing like obscene things from Reddit or from the internet and just like casting everyone into utmost horror. But yeah, be aware this can happen. Chances are it's not going to happen to you. You might have some strangers sabotaging your session, but there are ways to eject them. The most direct way would be to go into your participants panel, right click on their name, remove from class, and they're gone. Oh yeah, and here is a screenshot where you can kind of preempt that as well by making it so that only you can share your screen. Or if anyone else wants to share their screen, they need to get permission from you. So yeah.
Excellent. Very nice. Towards the end of the deck, there are a few key points that go into enhanced learning. It's these 5 items here. This will be in the deck and certainly be open for questions at the end if we want to talk about how to work on community, how to adjust expectations, how to stay approachable, how to leverage active learning, and also just how to make sure that our work and our documents and ourselves, even us as individuals, are available. The resources that we've pulled here, there's a great discount on G Suite for organizations and businesses. So right now, if you're trying to figure out a way to do all of this online and you want to keep your costs low, G Suite for organizations and businesses is available. They also have a suite of tools available for education. That PDF overview link gives you kind of the use cases. There's a great teaching center with tons of great lessons from Google Teaching Center, and then the 3 original sources that we mentioned at the beginning. And yeah, that's really it. We're right at 5 o'clock, which is good. I wasn't sure if we could get through all of it. And yeah, we're giving you the unofficial, official zombie certification so that all of us can continue to improvise in the short term and not only plan for the long term, but continue planning, optimizing, adapting, and growing for the long term.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ian and Curtis, for your time and insight today. For everyone who's in attendance, we hope that it was super helpful to all of you. We would like to keep hosting these types of webinars in order to help faculty and administrators keep teaching while students keep learning. So if you have ideas or have thoughts on what you would want to see us discuss next time, please drop it in the chat, email us, hit us up on social media. Before we go, if you could just drop that in, we'll hang out here in the room for a little bit, just to give you some time to drop that into the chat. But other than that, thank you so much for attending. We'll see you all very soon. Ian and Curtis, thanks again. Yeah, have a great rest of your day. We'll hang out.